The European leaders, once again blindsided by the American president, could be heading for Washington. There's peace in prospect, but at what price? Mr. Trump's 28-point plan has alarmed his allies. Even he says it isn't the finished article. But Zelensky's not happy. Keir Starmer's been on the phone to France's Macron and Germany's Merz about the proposed deal. I wonder if he's picked up the French and German words for sellout. Meanwhile, ahead of the budget, the Chancellor says, let's not spend time gazing in the rearview mirror, blaming the past. Probably wise. Voters can still see the winter fuel cut and the U-turn on welfare looming behind her. Just 3 days to go to a budget that's crucial for the British economy and the future of the Prime Minister and his Chancellor. We'll speak to the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander. And the Shadow Chancellor, Conservative Mel Stride. Also, 2 days after the former head of reform in Wales is sentenced to a decade in prison for taking Russian money, I'll be joined by the party's head of policy, Zia Yusuf. And we'll go live to Kyiv to speak to Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik as fears grow that Donald Trump could force the country into capitulation. Plus, with us throughout the show, editor of Tortoise Media, the former editor of The Times and director of BBC News, James Harding, the former head of Channel 4 News, Dorothy Byrne, and Provost of Queen's College, Oxford, and former director of the IFS, Paul Johnson. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the opening paragraph of his most famous book, The Art of the Deal, Donald Trump writes that deals are my art form. Other people paint beautifully on canvas or write wonderful poetry. I like making deals. The president says that his latest work, entitled Ukraine, hasn't quite come together yet. But I've no doubt that if asked, he would describe his plan as the geopolitical equivalent of the Mona Lisa. Anxious critics, including Europe's leaders, worry that what's coming out of the White House is actually a work of Pollock's. That's the great artist Jackson Pollock, of course. But as Mr. Trump points out in his book, while to some the Americans' canvases may look like someone just flung a pot of paint at the wall, his picture, number 17A, did sell for $200 million in 2016. Mr. Zelensky says he'll wait to see the completed work, though he fears that Ukraine may be forced to choose between its allies and its dignity. Mr. Putin seems to like it already, but he'll no doubt have some suggestions for improvement. He always does. So perhaps there's a way to go on this one. All the same, wishful thinking perhaps, but could this be the beginning of the end to this dreadful war? Right now, to Zelensky, it probably looks less like a deal and more like a surrender. And if there is a work of art that truly captures what is taking place in Ukraine right now, it is probably Picasso's horrific picture of slaughter of the innocents by fascists in the Spanish Civil War, Guernica. Let's start with the government this morning. A few moments ago, I spoke to the Transport Secretary. Heidi Alexander, when you discussed the proposed Ukraine peace deal at the Cabinet last week, what was the prevailing view?
So, Trevor, like many of your viewers, I learnt about the peace deal yesterday that President Trump was putting forward. I know that the Prime Minister spoke to President Trump yesterday, as well as President Zelensky. Clearly, it's been a harrowing conflict, and we need to find a way to secure that ceasefire and open up space for meaningful negotiations. There's clearly important meetings that are happening today in Geneva with the National Security Advisors. Jonathan Pell will be there for the UK with the US counterparts and National Security Advisors from other European countries as well as from Ukraine. And our fundamental view on this is the future of Ukraine has to be determined by Ukrainians themselves. But we do need to find a way to bring this conflict to an end and to secure that just and lasting peace that everyone wants.
I'll come into the substance of it in a moment, but OK, I can understand that maybe the Cabinet didn't know, but presumably the Prime Minister was warned this was coming.
So the Prime Minister has a very close relationship with President Zelensky and works closely with Donald Trump on this, because the only way that we're going to actually get a resolution to this conflict is by international powers working together to put pressure on Russia. There's been one side in this conflict, Trevor, that could... There's one side in this conflict...
That's not quite the same thing as saying he was consulted before.
There's one side in this conflict, Trevor, that could bring an end to the harrowing images that we're seeing on our television screens, and that's Russia, and their actions haven't lived up to their words on this, because they've been firing drones, precision-guided missiles into Ukraine over recent weeks. That's killing and maiming innocent children and the elderly.
Look, I understand all of that. But what we are concerned about, principally, is what is our role here? We're expected to play a part as a country, and I suppose what I'm really wondering here is, though we claim to be the Americans' closest allies, they didn't consult us, did they?
So the role of the United Kingdom and the work that the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been doing has been in putting that coalition of the willing together. That's why you saw
him... That's an answer to a different question.
That's why you saw him at the G20
us?
summit, talking with President Macron, talking with Chancellor Merz from Germany.
President Trump wasn't at the G20 summit.
It's really important that the coalition of the willing are working with President Trump.
Did he consult us?
We have been clear that there are elements of the peace plan that he has proposed that are essential for a just and lasting peace. It does require some additional work. I don't want to preempt the conversations that will be happening in Geneva today amongst the national security advisors with Ukraine there. But, you know, we do need to try and seize this moment in order to take some steps that get us closer to securing that ceasefire and to be delivering that just and lasting peace.
I'm hearing the intention here, but it's pretty pointless, isn't it? If the Americans don't think we're important enough to consult before they launch this on the world, what is the point of going to Washington? What is the point of going to Geneva? Because our voice doesn't count with them, does it?
I think it does count with them. And actually, if you listen to some of the comments of Marco Rubio when he was talking about the role that Jonathan Powell played in discussions about securing a ceasefire in Gaza in the Middle East, he spoke very highly and very positively of the role that the UK played in that. And so I think our relationship with the US is one of seeking to influence, to facilitate that dialogue with other global leaders, which is exactly what the Prime Minister was doing when he was in Johannesburg at the G20 yesterday. And as I say, there are going to be those really critical discussions in Geneva.
When Jonathan Powell goes to Geneva, is he going to be saying to Mr Rubio and the others, we don't like this plan?
What he's going to be saying is that we believe that there are elements of that 28-point plan that are essential for a lasting peace, but there is some more additional work that is required on it.
On what elements?
So I think you would have heard
what have we got doubts
you would have
about?
heard the Prime Minister yesterday, talking about the need for Ukraine to have their own capacity to defend themselves in terms of whether there are any caps on the size of the military and the defence forces in Ukraine. I think that's something that the Prime Minister has said that, Ukraine needs to be in a position, if we get to a ceasefire, where they can protect their civilians and secure the peace for the long term.
It's quite a curious objection, because actually, as I understand it, the number in the plan is 600,000, which is more than Ukrainian troops, which is more than the number they had before the war. But let's just deal with the broad prospects here. If the Ukrainians say they aren't going to play ball with this, the Americans say, OK, well, fine, we'll wash our hands. Do you think Europe can step in? Do we have the capacity to fill in for American military hardware and intelligence?
I think what we have seen is that Donald Trump, the President of the United States, alongside European leaders, believes that there can be a path to peace. On that, we are united. We are planning for what our role might be in the event that we can secure that ceasefire, and there is a peace agreement. It's, one of the elements of that 28-point plan is about the, the security, backup, if you like, the security guarantee that America would play. And so this has got to be an effort that is an international effort led by Ukraine about what is right for their country and their country's future.
The Americans would say, yeah, that's good, let's hope for the best. But let's also plan for the worst. So let me ask you again, if we were to plan for a situation in which the Americans say, as Mr. Trump said on Friday, if we can't make this work, you can't depend on America to continue doing this. Will the Europeans want to and be able to step in to fill in for what the Americans don't provide in the way of hardware and intelligence?
Trevor, we are working to secure that ceasefire and deliver a just and lasting peace. I'm not going to get ahead of those really critical discussions that are taking place in Geneva this afternoon.
OK, let's talk about your own portfolio. You're going to freeze rail fares, which is good news for those who go to work by rail, I think 10% of journeys. Presumably, given that 66% of us get to work by car, can we expect the Chancellor to freeze fuel duty for the 15th year in succession?
So to answer the first part of your question, where you refer to the announcement that we're making today about rail, I do think it's just worth highlighting that this will be the first time in 30 years that rail fares are frozen, and the Chancellor and I are acutely aware of how important affordability is to the travelling public. And so that's why when it comes to the rail network, we are stepping in to ensure that hard-working commuters, hard-working families can keep more of their hard-earned cash. If you look at what has happened to rail fares over the last decade and a half, they have increased by 60% between 2010 and 2024 under the Conservatives. We don't believe that is right if you want to attract more people to use the railways. So in this year, when we are setting up Great British Railways as well, which is going to bring the train operating companies into public ownership, stop the leakage of public money to the private shareholders, we think it's right to make life a little bit easier for people that are still dealing with cost of living pressures.
I'm very happy for you to explain to the 1 in 10, those who take that 1 in 10 journeys, what you're doing for them. I still haven't heard an answer to what the 2 out of 3 people who drive to work are going to get out of this.
So, Trevor, you talk about the number of people that go to work using the train. This fares freeze is going to...
You're going back to rail. I'm asking you about car drivers.
I think it's also important to say that the rail fares freeze is going to apply to over 1 billion journeys next year, and the savings that people can make on that are very significant. The other point I was also going to make is
I'm not even asking you about the billion who go on buses. I'm asking you about the many more who drive to work. What are they getting out of the budget?
No. The other point I wanted to make about the rail fares freeze is that when I was at Swindon Station yesterday afternoon, it was like being in an underground tube station. There were so many people who use the rail network for leisure purposes. That's a trend that we have seen post the pandemic. In terms of people who make their journeys to work...
Forgive me, you have explained quite fully why rail users are going to benefit.
Trevor, as the Transport Secretary.
But let me ask you for the third time. Can car users, which is 2/3 of all journeys to work, expect the fuel duty to be frozen again?
So you would not expect me to speculate on what is going to be contained in the budget on Wednesday. I understand that...
You can tell me a lot about rail fares.
I understand that the Chancellor is going to be in your studio next week, and you can put that question to her then. You will know that all matters in relation to taxation in particular are linked to fiscal
Apart from rail fares.
Rail fares aren't a matter of taxation, and so, when it comes to tax and duties, I'm going to have to suggest that you put those questions to the Chancellor next week.
All right. Look, the other big issue, which appears to be on the horizon, is that the Chancellor is, it seems, going to say that the 2-child cap will be lifted. Now, I'm not going to ask you to confirm or deny that, but would you welcome the lifting of the two-child cap if it's combined with some kind of welfare reform?
So you're right, I'm not going to speculate on what is going to be in the budget on Wednesday. What I would say is that tackling child poverty is in the DNA of the Labour Party. Nobody wants to see kids going without, and we know that 3/4 of children who are living in poverty at the moment are in working households, and growing up in poverty has consequences that last a lifetime. You're less likely to do well at school, and you're more likely, when you're a young adult, not to be in education, employment or training. So Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, has been doing some really important work through the Child Poverty Task Force.
She told us about that.
Looking at what levers can be pulled across the piece to tackle child poverty. We're not waiting around, though. That's why we've actually introduced free breakfast clubs in schools. We've expanded free childcare. We've also changed the eligibility, widened the eligibility for free school meals. So, look, you know, I'm confident, Trevor, that we are going to be taking decisions in this Parliament, which means that at the end of this five-year term, we will have more children who are more children.
And I take that as you would like to do this. But let me ask you a serious question. If the Chancellor does lift the two-child benefit cap now or in the near future, tell me how you explain that to Labour voters who have chosen not to have more than 2 children because they know they can't afford it, but then find themselves having to hand their taxes over to people who feel entitled to have a third choice because the state will back them. And you will know that the cap is actually popular. In fact, we looked up the data, 60% pretty much of all voters support it, and a majority of Labour voters support its retention.
So I think that people will understand that for the 3/4 of children who are living in households where mum and dad are in work, but the child is in poverty.
They know that, but they still
that child has not
done anything
the
to deserve
less chances in life. And this government is about giving opportunity to all. It shouldn't matter what the size of your parents' bank balance is in terms of your chances in life. And that's why I say tackling child poverty is in the DNA
it's a serious
of the Labour
point.
Party.
Voters still think this is right, morally right, that those who have made a choice not to have more than 2 children shouldn't have to pay for those who make a different choice.
And that is why we are also determined to make sure that our welfare system is fair. You've heard Pat McFadden, the new Work and Pensions Secretary, talking about the need to make sure that we get young people into work. We've got 1 in 8 young people who are not in employment, education or training. So we do need to continue.
So there will be another bash at welfare reform?
Well, we've always said that actually it's so much better for people to be in work and to be given the dignity of work and have the opportunities that work gives them. And so, you know, Pat is working very, very, hard on how we get to that system which can make sure that everyone has opportunity in life.
Heidi Alexander, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Trevor.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the editor of The Observer and former editor of The Times and director of BBC News, James Harding, the former head of Channel 4 News, Dorothy Byrne, and the provost of Queen's College, Oxford, and former director of the IFS, Paul Johnson. Let's start with Ukraine, Dorothy. I think the question in most people's minds is, there's a lot of activity, but are we really capable of making any difference as a country?
I think most of your viewers will see that Donald Trump came up with this plan, although a number of US senators have said that the Russians came up with the plan. Certainly the Russians could have come up with this plan, couldn't they? It's a great plan for them. They get to restrict the right of Ukraine to defend themselves. They get to keep the land they've invaded, and they get to keep land they don't even hold at this moment. Heidi Alexander said there some more additional work needs to be done. I mean, that's not just an understatement. That is ridiculous. This is not a deal. It would be a catastrophe for Ukraine. And I think you asked the right question, which is, if America walks away, and quite a number of people have said, this is America's excuse to walk away. I don't know if that's true, but there is a possibility here that Trump has come up with a terrible plan that he knows that the Ukrainians can't take, and then he will say, well, I tried to make peace, you didn't want to, and we will be left holding the baby.
James, what do you think?
So I thought you were completely right to ask the question, were they consulted? And obviously they weren't consulted. What's odd to me about the way in which Starmer and Macron and Merz and even Heidi Alexander responded is the official reality is quite even-tempered, and the behind-the-scenes truth is that Europe is absolutely appalled by what Donald Trump and his sort of amateur diplomat Steve Witkoff are proposing, because as Dorothy says, this is the equivalent of getting a call from the President of the United States and saying, look, can you give up Essex and Kent? Can you reduce your armed forces by 25%? Can you pass a constitutional amendment that means you won't have the protections of NATO? And by the way, we're going to do a bunch of mineral deals in your country and we want to take 50%. You can imagine the Ukrainian people have a response to that, but I think the Europeans have a really profound one, which is this is the end of the West. If this goes ahead, respect for sovereignty, respect for national defence, respect for alliances are all shot.
Do you think, Paul, as James says, that this is a danger for the transatlantic alliance?
Well, it clearly is, but I think there's a really important additional point here, which is that, I mean, look, Europe is as big and as rich as the US. It's vastly bigger and vastly richer than Russia, but it's taken a back seat throughout all of this, despite the fact that Ukraine is essentially part of Europe. So where is European leadership? Why are we waiting for Trump? Why haven't we been giving Ukraine what we said we would give them? Why is it all coming, or so much of it been coming from the US? So I think a large part of this also reflects failure on this side of the Atlantic, a failure to support Ukraine enough, but then obviously a failure in the US, given that Trump was elected saying he would end the war in 24 hours. He clearly wants to come to some kind of solution. And as James and Dorothy have said, this is a terrible solution.
But Paul, one thing, I think there's also a failure of storytelling, because the Europeans have made huge contributions to Ukrainian defence and the support for the Ukrainian economy. The Europeans are the ones who are going to say, look, we're going to spring the Russian assets that are held in Belgium, right? And if that money is made available, they can really make a difference. I would say one thing, this is not a deal. This is a set of ideas, and it seems to me as though there's a long way to go. And the reason I'm a bit sceptical about the whole thing, Trevor, is you have to get a constitutional amendment through the Ukrainian parliament, you have to get NATO to sign off on this, you have to get all the other G7 countries to accept it, and you have to do it by Thanksgiving, which is Thursday. I don't think that's going to happen.
Let me... I'm not going to be Mr. Trump's representative in this studio, but let me just at least put this on the table. He's rewriting some of the rules of international relations in the sense that American power is now naked, and he's ready to wield it and tell people he's ready to wield it. I guess the argument they'd make in the White House is this. This is realpolitik. The Ukrainians cannot win this war. The best thing that they can do that anybody can do for the Ukrainians is stop the killing. And if there's a price to pay for that, there's a price.
But we mustn't just think this is Ukraine. This is Ukraine today. And what we have to look at in this ludicrous 28-point plan is that it says that Russia is not expected to invade anybody else.
They don't
even have to promise not to carry out any other invasions. And I think that our government should be overtly explaining to the public that this isn't just about defending Ukraine. This is about defending Europe and protecting ourselves. You said, how would we feel if there was a 25% reduction in our army? Our army is already tiny. We have more traffic wardens than soldiers, I understand. So if we went to war, we would be expecting all the traffic wardens to be putting tickets on the Russian tanks.
I have to tell you, Dory, there's a bloke on my street I would put in any trench tomorrow. But just on this, the key point for us is if Mr. Starmer gets on a plane and he goes to Geneva or he goes to Washington or whatever it is, will it make any difference? Do we have clout?
I think, Trevor, the answer is obviously much less than we'd like, but the reality is that it's worth stopping and just thinking, as Dorothy says, it's about more than Ukraine. So take one obvious issue, Poland. If the logic of this is that when push comes to shove, the United States no longer respects sovereignty, no longer respects borders. If the United States says, look, we're not going to honour our old alliances, then if you're in Poland and you're sitting on the border with Russia, you're looking to NATO, you're looking to us to say, what are your commitments in the future to our safety? And at that moment, the Europeans and the United States diverge. And they start saying, well, look, we have commitments to our continent that you obviously won't honour. And at that moment, the UK, the Europeans, Paris, Berlin, start thinking very differently about the world. And this is the bit where, as you're embodying, Donald Trump's sort of international press secretary here, I'd say to you, you've got a real problem. You've got a real problem because when the Europeans start asking themselves the question, they'll start looking for a different kind of global diplomacy, one that links with China, one that links with India, one that's not as close to the United States. OK, well, I'm sure Caroline Levitt would have a pretty smart answer to that, but I haven't. Let's go on to talk about the budget. This, Paul, has been, how can I put it, the most trailed budget in human history.
I mean, it's been extraordinary. I can't believe we're still waiting. It's been, 5 or 6 months of speculation. And it's not been trailed in the way that many budgets are trailed. I mean, many budgets have been trailed in the sense we've got a drip of what's actually going to happen. We've had months and months of speculation about this might happen, that might happen, virtually everything might happen. And then, of course, we had the extraordinary U-turn on the U-turn with regard to the manifesto commitments. And this is genuinely damaging. I mean, the Bank of England, in its latest report, the very first thing it said about the reason for slow growth in the last few months is speculation about the budget. So this has been really poorly handled. And, I mean, at least we'll find out the answer in a couple of days.
Have you got a single word on which you can sum it up? I've got one for you, but...
not one I think I can repeat on morning television, but yeah, shambles would be a good one.
Amazing. We spend too much time together, because that's exactly the word I thought you'd come up with. But it's cost us already to some extent, hasn't it?
Well, it has. I mean, we saw this last year. I mean, just as one example last year, we know that tens of thousands of people took money out of their pensions because they were worried about potential changes to the taxation of pensions. The Chancellor made a change to inheritance tax of pensions last year. Since then, she said not a word. So we're all supposed to be saving for 40, 50 years for our pensions. We don't know one day to the next how the tax treatment's going to respond. It looks like this has had an effect on the housing market because of the uncertainty about that. As I said, the Bank of England has said it thinks it's had an effect on business investment. So all of this has actual real-world damaging effects on the economy because of the degree of uncertainty and speculation, which itself is wrapped up in where we were last year with no room against the fiscal rules.
We'll come back in the next part and talk a bit more about the substance of it. But Dorothy, politics of this, what do you think?
Well, it's catastrophic for her.
Stronger words.
She says we can't just muddle through. She's not even muddling through. But to your point, I know so many people who've taken money out of their pension, who say they won't buy a house, who say they won't sell a house, who were going to take on some extra people, but now they don't dare. And young people who are saying, I can't even believe pensions will work in the future.
All right. It is now 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Transport Secretary's told this programme that additional work is required on the US peace plan for Ukraine. Heidi Alexander said Ukraine must have the capacity to defend itself. Well, as we've been discussing this morning, diplomatic efforts step up a gear today as representatives of the United States, Ukraine and European leaders are meeting in Geneva. Our international correspondent, John Sparks, is there for us now. Good morning, John. What can we expect from where you are today?
Hi, Trevor. Yeah, very good question. And I don't know the answer to it. We know that Steve Witkoff has arrived, as has Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State. They are here. They're making their way to the US mission in Geneva, which is close to the UN complex here, where we believe these negotiations will take place. And the Brits, the French, the Germans, the Europeans, the Italians and the Ukrainian delegation, they are already here. We expect them to talk through the day. It's clearly a pivotal movement, made slightly less pivotal, I think, by the fact that Donald Trump told reporters last night that this peace plan, the 28-point peace plan, is not his final offer. But it's clear, isn't it, that he's running out of patience. He represents one of the battlegrounds in this war. The fight for his favor, for his patronage, is fought keenly, and that will continue. He's clearly running out of patience, and I think the threat that the Ukrainians face here is that the Americans and that Trump, he withdraws his aid in terms of intelligence support for the Ukrainians, or perhaps he stops selling weaponry to the Ukrainians, which the Europeans, incidentally, they pay for. But there's a lot at stake for the Ukrainians, and they are being asked to make a series of absolutely momentous decisions in the next 5 days, giving up 1/5 of their territory, for example, a substantial reduction in the size of their military, agreeing not to use certain weaponry in their defense, even ultimately forgiving the Russians for war crimes committed on their territory. So they are being asked to do an extraordinary thing in the next 5 days. As it stands at the moment, I think what we're going to find out is just how flexible the Americans are. Steve Witkoff will be there. He's the part author of this deal, but Marco Rubio thought to be more hawkish on the Russians. We're going to find out exactly what the Americans are thinking, I think, by the end of the day.
John, thank you so much for that. By the way, I love it when Sky correspondents tell us the truth, which is nobody knows what's going to happen, especially those involved. That was John Sparks from Geneva. People in Ukraine will no doubt be feeling particularly worried this weekend, though. As Putin's missiles and drones continue to kill people there, they now face another threat from the White House and that peace deal. I want to try to get a sense of how people there are responding. So we can speak now to the Ukraine Member of Parliament, Kira Rudik, live in Kyiv. Good morning, Ms. Rudik.
Good morning, Trevor, and thank you so much for having me.
What has been the reaction in Kyiv to the American proposals?
People are worried indeed, and it sounds really painful, right? When you're facing one of the hardest winters in your history, when we have electricity where I am for just a couple of hours a day, where our front line is in a very tough situation, and people fighting there also are requesting more and more support. And then one of our key allies basically is offering us to give up on our territories, forgive Russians for what they have done to us, and move forward without any security guarantees. People are concerned, this is true, and I think the United States do not realize how huge of an impact on the international relations this is. Like last time when President Trump and his team stopped intelligence and sending weapons to Ukraine just for a couple of days, we have already seen how people stopped trusting those nice men and women who are coming here and saying, hey, we are from the United States, we're here to help. And I think right now the whole Europe is watching and thinking about what does it mean to have the United States on your side, and is it a bad or a good thing?
What do you think happens if the Americans decide, as some people are suggesting, that Ukraine isn't going to play ball and they no longer want to be part of the whole situation and they essentially withdraw. What do you think is going to happen to Ukraine?
It will be very tough, but we hope that our partners in Europe will be able to cover for some of the weapons and intelligence that the United States are threatening to withdraw. However, Trevor, I hope that we will not get to that. I want to remind everyone that this is not the first time when Ukraine has received a draft of a deal that was unacceptable. The situation with the rare earth minerals deal was very similar when we were given a piece of paper that included something that Ukraine was simply not ready to give up. And then after a couple of rounds of negotiations, we ended up with the document that Ukraine was even able to ratify in the parliament. I voted for it. So it seems that we are going to this round one of negotiation where the American team will hear what does Ukraine have to say about this 28-point plan, and we will take it from there. I do not believe that President Trump will push towards his deadline. It is just not reasonable all in all. I think he wants to push for the negotiations to begin, and that would happen. But I want to underline that the position of our European allies is very critical here, both on the side of amount of weapons and intelligence they can be covering if the United States choose to walk away, and for standing strong with Ukraine on the other side of the table with the United States delegation.
I hear what you say, but there is a risk that President Trump might not be bluffing. Will you and your colleagues in Parliament advise Mr. Zelensky, when he speaks to Mr. Trump, to reject this deal?
He shouldn't be saying he's rejecting the deal, because we already learned this is not the way to deal with President Trump. He should be saying that we are ready to discuss point by point, specifically about the security guarantees that Ukraine is getting, and hopefully that we will come to the version of the document that will be acceptable for Ukraine. Look, there is no other nation that wants this war to be over, right? It's our people that are being killed at the front line and in their homes every single night. And so we want the war to end, but not at any price. This is why we should get a very clear understanding what are the security guarantees that the United States are offering in this document, and if there are any, to explain what are the red lines for Ukraine there, and what are the things that we are ready to discuss. There are some good points there, for example, return of Ukrainian children or exchange of the prisoners of war. This is something that we have been pushing since the day one, and Russia never agreed. So we are getting to this super important moment, is how does President Trump actually push Russia to execute if he was not able to get them to a ceasefire?
If I may ask just very briefly, President Zelensky says that Ukraine may have to choose between its allies and its dignity. Is there a choice for you?
That was never a choice. We didn't choose to capitulate in 2022. We do not intend to do this right now. We are a free country, we are a free nation, and we will continue fighting.
Kira Ruddock, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Back to our panel, James Harding, Dorothy Byrne and Paul Johnson. James, have they really got a choice here?
Yes, I think they do. And I also thought that actually it's quite moving hearing that determination at the end, a determination to be a free country. I think it's also worth mentioning, Trevor, we're sitting here in Westminster. There are flags flying on government buildings around here, the Ukraine flag. This country is committed to making sure that the Ukrainian people know that those rights are also respected. I would say one other very quick thing. There are two big things we don't know. We don't really know how the corruption scandal inside Kyiv that's around the Zelensky government is going to affect President Zelensky. And we also don't know how much Donald Trump's decline in the polls in the United States are going to embolden Republicans and mean that he's undermined in terms of his own plan.
Dorothy, Paul, what did you make of that?
Well, Something she reminded us of there was the children who were stolen. And that's such a scandal. Are we just going to say, oh yeah, you can, in Europe, you can just steal people's children and we're helpless, we can't do anything about it? And I know it's easy for an old lady to say this, but we have to stand up for freedom in Europe. We have to.
I agree. That was very impressive, very moving, what we just heard. And I hope whatever the Americans do, again, to return to my previous point, we need to show even more leadership in Europe. We can all talk about how we support Ukraine. We can give them the money and the weapons that we are. Should we be doing more? I guess is the question we need to be asking ourselves and really backing up that rhetoric, because it's easy to say, we shouldn't give anything up, but it's harder to do it.
All right. Well, this is not over, and actually, no doubt, the Chancellor will have to think about that as well. All right, this week, the former head of Reform UK in Wales was sentenced to more than 10 years in prison for taking bribes to make statements in favour of Russia when he was an MEP. Parties condemned him as treasonous, and leader Nigel Farage previously described him as a bad apple. I'm joined now by Reform's head of policy, Zia Yusuf. Zia, before we get on to that, can I just ask your reaction to the Trump peace proposal?
Well, look, as Nigel told The Telegraph on Friday, there are some concerns, I think, about this, and we're going to wait and see what the formal Ukrainian response is. But I think ultimately the most important stakeholder with regards to Ukraine's sovereignty are the Ukrainians themselves. I think the initial reaction we have is that too much appears to be being given to Vladimir Putin, which we're concerned about. But again, the most important stakeholder in Ukraine's sovereignty, as we just heard, are the Ukrainians themselves.
Well, I'm going to ask you this. It's never been entirely clear to many people where your party stands on Putin, or specifically your leader. Here's what Mr. Farage said last June. He said, "It was obvious to me that the ever-eastward expansion of NATO and the EU was giving this man, Putin, a reason to say they're coming for us again and go to war. We provoked this war." Look, whatever Nigel Farage meant by that, would you accept that his words may have given encouragement to the Kremlin?
No, I would not accept that at all. And but the context for those words, by the way, Nigel gave a speech in Europe about a decade ago, basically warning that there's a path that's being head on here. But look, as Nigel said, we are where we are. Nigel's already said, for example, when he was pressed as to how he would respond if he was Prime Minister and Russian jets encroached into NATO airspace, that his view is that those planes should be shot down. We're crystal clear about our position.
I'm not trying to misrepresent. I'm not trying to misrepresent his
Putin.
Position at all. All I'm saying is that all I'm asking is, Russians are free to take anybody's words and mangle them. Do you think that it was a mistake for him to use the words, "We provoked this war"?
Again, no, I don't think so, because of the context of him merely repeating what he had said a decade ago. And listen, I would also say this, the notion that Vladimir Putin, the murderous dictator, is making decisions based on what Nigel Farage was saying here in England, I think is for the birds. We know we are now in a situation where Ukraine's sovereignty has been violated. Vladimir Putin needs to be brought to heel, and that's what we need to focus on.
But I want to give you the opportunity to be absolutely crystal clear. Sure. Because if I were watching this in Moscow, I'd already be writing down, he supported the phrase, we, the West, provoked the war. And that comes from a leading figure in the party that is leading the polls in the United Kingdom. So actually a reform government could turn out to be an ally here. I want you to be absolutely clear where you stand on this. Do you repudiate the word,
Trevor,
we provoked the war?
Nigel has been on the record, 2 weeks ago, saying that if he was a Prime Minister and Russian planes encroached into NATO airspace, he as Prime Minister would suggest that those be shot down. I don't know how much clearer we can be. And as someone who's worked with Nigel, I will tell you this. He did say a decade ago, and I think, frankly, it was quite prophetic, that there was a path that was being headed down here. But we are where we are now, and whenever Nigel is asked about this, Trevor, whenever Nigel's asked about this, he is crystal clear. Vladimir Putin is a murderous dictator. He is the aggressor in this war, and if Russian planes
I
were
asked you a very
encroaching to NATO
specific
airspace,
question.
they should be shot down.
Nigel
I don't know how
Farage
much
isn't
can be any
sitting
clearer.
here. You are. You're the authority.
I'm not, because he's the leader of the party.
Yeah, but you're the head of policy. You're on television. You're a top guy. He used the words, "We provoked this war." Do you repudiate those words?
If you take all of the things Nigel has said in context, over the last decade, again, this is not some flash-in-the-pan comment. Nigel's been crystal clear. And Trevor, you're a smart person, and so are the people watching this programme. Two things can be true at the same time.
Why can't you just say...
He has said...
Why can't you just say...
Because it is not Nigel Farage's position that we, quote, provoked the war. Nigel's position is that a whole series of decisions...
We'll get out the clip before the end of the programme.
A whole series of positions were taken by NATO and by the European Union. We are where we are, and reform, and Nigel stands with the Ukrainians as Prime Minister. And by the way, that is a firmer position than the Prime Minister, by the way. Nigel's position is if Russian planes encroach into NATO airspace, they should be shot down. And I put it to you, those are stronger words with regards to Vladimir Putin than either the Prime Minister or Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, by the way, Ukraine's not in NATO, so it wouldn't apply. But I'll tell you why this matters to you politically. Mr Nathan Gill, your former leader in Wales, left party 4 years ago. All of that, I get that. He's now starting a long sentence for taking money from Russians. There will be many people who will say, well, these guys are soft on Putin. They think that the whole war is partly our fault and not his. Why should we trust anything they say about Russia, given that one of their people took money from Russians?
Well, I think that would be an incredibly unreasonable position to take. Look, Nathan Gill, what he did was treasonous.
Can be unreasonable as it
what he did was treasonous. It was horrific. It was awful. He's now been dealt with by the authorities. He deserves the sentence that he's gotten. But as you've just said, this is a guy, which, as far as we're concerned, is ancient history. I've never met him. I'd never heard of him, actually, until I saw his names, sadly, in the newspaper. So I think it is unreasonable to besmirch everybody else at Reform and the millions of people around the country who support Nigel and support our party.
All right. What do you want to hear from the Chancellor this week? I've already said to Mel Stride, I imagine he wants to hear the words, "I resign." Let's put that aside.
Well, look, we've already laid out £25 billion in savings that the Chancellor could enact if they wanted to. Look, we keep hearing, people watching this programme have heard time and again over the last couple of decades, tough decisions need to be made, right? And invariably, when it comes to British citizens, it's they've got to pay more tax and accept worse services, and yet there appears to be an infinite money tree and a blank cheque for foreign citizens. So what we're saying is let's make foreign citizens bear the brunt first of these, quote, difficult decisions. So we've talked about, for example, withdrawing welfare, specifically universal credit for foreign nationals. We've talked about dramatically reducing the foreign aid budget until the state's finances are on a better footing. And we've talked about meaningfully increasing the immigration health surcharge, which is the amount of money that foreign nationals pay to access our NHS.
I've let you put forward your programme. I want to put this to you, ask you about this. Because in January last year, you said to us, you could cut the civil service in half. It's roughly 250,000 jobs. Your new policy guy, Danny Kruger, now says that your target is just 100,000 civil service jobs. Why have you gone soft?
We haven't. I can tell you for a fact. I spoke to Danny last night about
100,000.
We will announce. Well, that's not our position on the civil service. We will cut far more jobs than that. And I'll tell you,
it'll be more than 100,000.
We are working currently on a detailed plan on how we can dramatically reduce the size of the civil service. But I want to go back to the original point. We have laid out £25 billion of savings that could be made by this Chancellor. And by choosing not to do that, Trevor, and choosing to raise taxes on people in this country, she is prioritising foreign nationals over UK citizens, which has frankly been the refrain of the political class for the last 15 years. All
right, talking about foreign nationals, Shabana Mahmood's made you all look a bit milk and water this week, hasn't she? She's shot your fox.
Well, what she's doing is... I think she's doing a couple of things. Number one, it is really important to look past a lot of the headline-grabbing things that she's announced. One, almost everything she's announced requires primary legislation, meaning she needs her own backbench MPs to support her. No suggestion that that is actually going to happen. In fact, I think more than 20 Labour MPs are publicly on the record as opposing. And that's number one. Number two, she's also talking about creating new, quote, safe and legal routes, and has refused to put a hard cap on what those numbers would be. So, from what we can tell, she's opening up a back door here where she can reduce illegal migration by allowing those people to come in legally.
She's harder than you. She's made you look soft.
We have said, Trevor, we have been very open about it. If she really wants to stop the boats, then reformparty.uk/defections, we will have hundreds of MPs who will vote such measures through. If she really believes in that, she should go and apply to defect.
Zia Yusuf, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Next, we'll speak live to the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's turn now to the Conservatives. A little earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. Mel Stride, do you think the Prime Minister's right to get involved in the negotiations over Ukraine?
Absolutely. I think it's really important we get a just peace when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And that has to include, for example, security guarantees for Ukraine so that whatever peace is finally concluded sticks, and we're not left with a situation where Russia is just basically gearing up for the next attempt to violate Ukraine's sovereignty. So I think we do actually, as a country, have an important role to play diplomatically in all of that to make sure that this proposed arrangement moves in the right direction.
I take it from what you're saying that you don't think much of the Trump 28 points.
Well, look, it's a starting position, and he indicated the US president last night that that isn't his final position. I think he's right to say that. But it does seem to me that a proposal in which Ukraine gives up the whole of the Donbass, limits its army to 600,000, makes a clear statement that it will not be joining NATO at any point and therefore not have perhaps those security guarantees in place is probably some way from where a final settlement will land. But we've got to encourage all sides to continue on this path of negotiation to arrive at that point of a just peace. And we certainly have a key role to play in that process.
OK, before we come to the budget, one other thing that's happened this week is Lord Gove apologised for the failures of the last Conservative government, of which he was a member, over COVID. Would you like to join him in that apology?
Yeah, I think that where the inquiry has concluded that there were excess deaths due to certain decisions that were taken that might, with hindsight, and stress with hindsight, have been taken differently, then of course I think that's appropriate. At the same time, I don't think we should overlook the fact that, of course, it's very easy to look back in time. This is a once-in-a-century event, a very difficult moment for our country, and of course mistakes will have been made. We need to learn from those. The report also says, of course, that the vaccine rollout was extremely successful, and we had got the economy by getting the deficit down at that point to a stage where we were able to borrow billions of pounds to support millions of jobs and people's livelihoods up and down the country, and I don't think that should be overlooked either. So there were great successes around the COVID period, as well as inevitably some failings.
All right, let's talk about the budget. Chancellor's going to speak on Wednesday. Apart from the words, "I resign," what would you most like to hear from her?
Well, I want to see the Chancellor stand up and explain how she is going to control public spending, particularly welfare, in order to make sure that we're not having to put up taxes, and she's not going to be breaking all those promises that she's made yet again, in order to get the economy moving and get business moving. Because part of the story of why we're in the position we are in, Trevor, is that she's loaded up taxes on businesses, particularly jobs, borrowed a lot of money, spent a lot of money, put up inflation, interest rates higher than they would otherwise have been, and mounted up our national debt. The servicing costs upon which are now 100 billion a year, or twice what we spent on defence. So the only way out...
Your government did give it a bit of a nudge towards 100% of GDP.
Well, we've just moved from the previous question about COVID, and I think most people felt it was right that we intervened and supported millions of jobs up and down the country. That came with a price tag of £400 billion, and that did have to then feed into being paid off later on down the line too. But my point is simply this: she has a clear choice. She can either go for just putting up loads of more taxes, which will continue to keep us in this doom loop of higher taxes, lower growth, destroyed fiscal headroom, going back for more taxes. That's the loop she's in. To break out of that cycle, she's got to get some backbone. She's got to get some backbone and get in there and get government spending under control, particularly welfare. But the signs are, Trevor, if I may finish this final point, is that she's actually going to scrap the two-child benefit cap, which is the cap that means that up to 2 children are covered by benefits in families. But if you want to have a larger family than that, you should be taking, I think, the same tough choices that taxpayers take when it comes to whether you can afford to have a larger family or not.
So you're not that keen on doing what the Institute for Fiscal Studies reckons that lifting the two-child cap would do, which is to get 630,000 children out of poverty. You're not too keen on that?
So, look, the best way of getting people and families out of poverty is through work and employment. And where we are on that is very clear. We don't believe that it's right to have a culture in our country where too many people are on benefits. They don't have the incentive to go in to work for a living. As many millions of people up and down our country, hard-working people who get up early in the morning, who struggle away with those jobs are doing, we think that that should be the primary option for everybody.
So work solves poverty, all right. What about the 15-year freeze on fuel tax? Should that be maintained?
Well, we'll have to see
what... Duty, I should say.
We'll have to see what the government does, but... At the end of the day, we froze it, and we froze it for a very good reason, which is, of course, it feeds into the kind of costs that people are facing on a day-to-day basis. And the problem is, Trevor...
You wouldn't be keen on unfreezing it now?
Well, I'm not the Chancellor about to give a budget, OK? But what I would observe is this, that this government and this Chancellor has driven our economy into the ground, loaded us up with debt, higher unemployment, lower growth, higher inflation and so on. And the consequences of that, I'm afraid, are that things are far tighter on just those kind of questions than they would otherwise be.
All right, well,
room for manoeuvre is very limited.
All right,
that's the tragedy of the situation.
Let me ask you about another one, which isn't about sort of instant, and where you could and should have a view, I would suggest. Is it time to end the triple lock on pensions?
So we stand by the triple lock. And I think, Trevor, people too readily...
it's unsustainable, don't you?
People too readily overlook the fact that under the last Labour government, we had the 4th highest level of pensioner poverty in Europe. And people are now no longer constantly talking about pensioner poverty, pensioners dying in cold winters and so on. The problem is not completely...
And isn't that the case for getting rid of it? Because we've solved the problem.
A part of that. But the other point I was going to go on to make is if you then look at the circumstances of pensioners, of course, they're not in a position, typically, to be able to go and get another job or get a job or go out and work longer hours because, by definition, they are retired. So I think it's really important and fundamental that we look after our pensioners in that way.
All right, well, last point about the policy. You've made the case for the abolition of stamp duty completely.
Yeah.
What about council tax? Is it time to revalue it?
So these are things that we are looking at as part of our policy renewal programme. The last valuation was in the early 1990s. So there's no doubt that that is an unsatisfactory situation, but that is something that we are looking at. We haven't made announcements on that at this point. We have...
But you're open to it?
What I've said is that I recognise that if you have a system which relies on property valuations going back about 30 years ago, that is clearly suboptimal and unsatisfactory. But it's not something where we've come to clear policy on that at the moment. We have plenty of time to do that between now and the general election. We have said, however, when it comes to business rates, on the business side, we should take 250,000 small businesses, pubs in our high streets out of business rates altogether. And we've shown where we can get the savings in areas like welfare, getting the benefits bill down to do that. And that's at the heart of the decisions, Trevor, is if you can get on top of spending, if you can get the welfare bill down, you can lower people's taxes.
One more quick one. Chancellor says that people have been mansplaining to her about how she should do her job. Are you one of the boys who's been mansplaining to her?
I think this is just all chaff that's being thrown up in the air as smokescreen to try and get us off what's really happening. This isn't about gender.
Let's always say
this is about mismanagement of the economy, Trevor, OK? And what Rachel Reeves can't step away from is the fact that we've now got unemployment at a 5-year high, spiralling inflation, people feeling a lot worse off, business confidence, rock bottom, anemic growth, and all of those challenges which are down to her choices, I'm afraid.
Mel Stride, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
In just a moment, we'll discuss that all-important budget with our panel.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Well, back to our panel, James Harding, Dorothy Byrne and Paul Johnson. James, I gave both Paul and Dorothy the chance to react to the build-up, and Paul said shambles, Dorothy said catastrophe. What's your one word?
For the budget process?
Yes.
I would say it's been tactical. And I don't say that in a kind way. What I mean by that is the decision to bind their hands over what they would do on tax ahead of the election in the manifesto was a tactical decision around the best way to get elected. The decision to raise public sector pay was a tactical decision to deal with the unions. The climb down on welfare reform was tactical in terms of backbenchers. And the back and forth on the income tax, national insurance contributions, 2p increase was tactical too. I say all of that because I've actually got a slightly different view, I suspect, from certainly from Mel Stride and Zia Youssef on what you'll get on Wednesday, which is I think you'll probably hear quite an optimistic budget. And this is not what you'll probably read about the following day or see in the news bulletins, but if you watch it at 12:30 on Wednesday, my suspicion is that having looked at a fix the future budget, a structural budget, and realised they can't do it, they're going to go for a tactical budget, a sort of ease the pain, cost of living budget, and that's going to be a lot about optimism for consumers and businesses.
Paul, well, that's interesting because whatever it is, 15 months ago before the election, Paul, you sat on this side of the desk and you said nobody's telling the truth, nobody's being honest with the electors. And James is suggesting that kind of that's where we're going again.
Well, I mean, the whole problem, start of the problem here is, as you say, 18 months ago, neither of the main parties were spelling out that there were some really tough decisions to take. I mean, the Conservatives were pretending they could make massive cuts in spending in order to keep taxes down. Labour was pretending, I remember Keir Starmer saying he's got to pull the growth lever and all will be well. Well, he's still searching for that lever. It was obvious before the election that either taxes were going to have to go up, or so there can be really, really tough choices on spending. Not at all surprisingly, Labour has decided to increase both. I mean, it's worth remembering last year's budget is remembered for a £40 billion tax rise. It was also an £80 billion spending increase. So that was a really big budget a year ago. And then tactically again, as James was saying, Rachel Reeves said, and I'm not going to have to come back for more tax rises, knowing that there was a 50-50 shot that she would. I mean, that was a gamble that hasn't paid off. So we've continued to sort of have this, in a sense, let's hope, let's pray that things turn out better. And I'm afraid so far, at least, they haven't.
Well, the spending's still going on, isn't it? I've just got my pensioners' winter fuel allowance, and I look forward to having it for the rest of this Parliament.
I think it's supposed to be withdrawn from people on your sorts of incomes, Trevor.
You don't know. How much Sky pays me. But the point is, that's still being spent. We're now talking about lifting the two-child cap. How serious is the black hole going to be, Paul? And what are her options now?
Well, we're all waiting for the Office of Budget Responsibility to tell us the scale of increased borrowing. It looks like she's going to have to fill a, quotes, hole of 20 to 30 billion. That's quite a big number. And you'd normally think, if you're looking certainly for something like 30 billion of tax increases, it's quite hard to get without doing something on the three big ones, income tax, national insurance, or VAT. Now, it looks like almost certainly, I would say, we're going to get something on income tax, but it won't be an increase in the rates. It'll be another 2 years of freezes to allowances and thresholds. Now, that's extending what the last government did, but again, a reversal on exactly what the Chancellor said last year when she said, I'm not going to freeze them for another couple of years. But if you do, you get £8 or £10 billion pretty politically painlessly, but in a way which is more regressive or less progressive than increasing rates, but it's politically straightforward. If you're then looking for another 20 billion or so, and you're not going to increase those rates, you're looking at a whole series of things. We've seen just about everything briefed out, haven't we? It might be salary sacrifice schemes for pensions, it might be something on council tax for higher value properties, it might be some changes to capital gains tax, and so on, and so on, and so on. I think there, Chancellor have to be incredibly careful, because some of those might be sensible changes, but a lot of them will annoy some people, and there's a real potential for making the system even more complicated and doing some economic damage along the way.
And there are probably going to be some hidden spending. I didn't have time to get into it with Heidi Alexander, but I suspect frozen rail fares means higher rail subsidy in some way, shape or form. So at some point that actually, though she's quite right to say the government doesn't spend that, but it'll have to backfill in some way for the money that the rail companies won't raise.
Well, they will, and what's surprising in a way, given where we are, is that there's quite a lot of speculation about more spending. So that is more spending, the higher rail fare, not increasing rail fares, 3 billion maybe on getting rid of the 2-child limit, and speculation at least that there will be something to keep fuel bills down. So that will just add to the pressure on other taxes.
Dorothy, is there a risk here with this, what people are calling the smorgasbord approach, lots of different tax rises, that they end up in a situation where they don't break the promise, but actually they annoy enough people with these small levers to make this a spectacularly unpopular budget?
Yes, because there'll be all sorts of little taxes here and there which will offend specific people. I mean, we know, and there's another survey in the Sunday Times today which tells us again that the majority of British people think that there should be some real public spending cuts. And ultimately, Labour's problem is that we're heading for this huge welfare bill of £100 billion, and we've seen them absolutely unable to make even some quite small welfare cuts because of their backbenchers. So I think the public feel they're looking to their backbenchers more than the public. And some of the taxes, I had to literally look up, what is a milkshake tax? I thought I had misread it, and I asked my partner, am I really stupid? What's a milkshake tax? And he said, oh, I don't know. And I looked it up.
You better explain it now.
And it's literally a tax on milkshakes. And it's going to make 200 million quid or something. I didn't know there were so many milkshakes. And if you are an ordinary voter, you just think, bike tax, milkshake tax, it's not going to work.
Paul, can I just ask you about this? Because one of the things Will Hutton has been writing for us in The Observer, and actually your old colleague from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Ben Zaranko, has been writing the same stuff, which is the way we do the budget is just nutty. That the role of the Office for Budget Responsibility, the forecasts change, and so the 1 minute the Chancellor thinks that she has to do X and then it has to be Y. Is there a problem in the way we do budgets?
I'm going to ask you to come back on that in the next part. We've got to go to break.
You can't have Trevor's job.
Exactly.
Asking questions is out. There's one person who does that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fair enough.
Never have this guy on the show again. Right, but we've got to go to bring some breaking news to you. Just to bring you right up to date on the talks taking place in Geneva today on Donald Trump's peace plan. The United States says that both the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and the President's Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, are now in Geneva. A United States official says there have been, quote, positive and constructive talks with Ukrainians already, and there will be a full day of US-Ukrainian meetings throughout today. Well, there'll be much more on Sky News later, and we'll be back with our panel in a moment.
She's preparing the ground to raise taxes.
The budget, I've got to do the things that I think are right.
There are tax rises coming down the track.
You can't rule out further tax rises.
It's exactly what she's going to have to do.
She'll be talking about that when it comes to the budget.
We'll be talking everything money as the Chancellor reveals what's in her budget.
Goodness knows how it's going to play out if these tax rises are announced.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress. I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes. This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
They call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Back to our panel, James Harding, Dorothy Byrne and Paul Johnson. Paul, can you respond to James's question about whether the process by which we do the budget and all, with OBR and all the rest of it is still appropriate?
I'm less sceptical about that process. I mean, for one thing, I don't think it is the case that the OBR forecast changed a lot between their first iteration and their last. I think and the government was, as it were, giving as an excuse for U-turning on their U-turn on increasing income tax, that the OBR forecast had changed a lot. I'd be very surprised if that's what happened. I think that was just a political decision. Now, there is an issue here, which is that obviously the forecasts 4 or 5 years out are very uncertain. But it's the government that's tied its hands to say, we want to meet this particular fiscal rule. And it's the government which left itself with absolutely no space for manoeuvre. And it's the government that knew a year ago that there was a 50-50 shot that they'd be in this position today. And if they didn't want to be in this position today, they should have done something differently a year ago, or they should have given the OBR a different kind of remit. It's interesting, chancellors in opposition are very keen on this kind of role for an independent body, but they don't like it up them, as it were, once they're actually in power.
OK, before we move on from the budget, just quickly, Dorothy, Chancellor says people are mansplaining.
Well, I have to say I got really annoyed because I am a feminist. Men do mansplain and men are sexist. But in the case of the criticism of Rachel Reeves over her budget plans, I could do a lot of womansplaining to her. It's not that she's a victim of mansplaining, it's that she's not doing a very good job.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All of us who've worked for Dorothy know what terror feels like. And actually, now we're on to talking about the media. There are at least two people in this studio who might be appropriate picks for the next Director General of the BBC. I'm assuming you've ruled yourself out, Paul.
Oh, I have. I mean, the call has come, but I've ruled myself out.
OK.
You'd be too financially efficient.
I want to give Dorothy and James the opportunity, because, you know, I know the chairman's probably watching, to take half a minute, 45 seconds, just to, you know, explain.
So, why you would be the best DG? You're being unusually elliptical here, because I thought you were talking about yourself. Do you want to do it?
Only if you wanted a reality TV version of W1A would I be the Director General.
So I am very happily, as you know, wedded to The Observer. We bought it just 6 months ago. And I'm just telling you this to explain, because every journalist who's called and said, like, are you in the running for this? I say, no, it's not going to be me. And the reason is, we took over The Observer partly because we thought we could turn it around, and that seems to be happening. I should just say, this week...
This is an ad for The Observer.
No, and I'm going to make my ad for The Observer, because, actually, for the first time in 233 years, this week, you're going to be able to start buying The Observer digitally. It's quite a big moment, so I forgive that plug. But there's a bigger reason for it. I think that when we bought it, we were really affected by George Orwell.
I
am. Just give me a second. Just give me a second, because it's really important. I hope you'll just forgive me.
OK, quickly, because we've run out of time.
George Orwell wrote for The Observer, and he called it the enemy of nonsense. And I think there's a role for a paper like that as regards what's happening in the BBC, because I think that there's plenty of nonsense in the world. No, just forgive me.
OK.
No, because the political interference at the BBC, what has happened at the BBC, has undermined trust in its independence, and we need to restore that.
Dorothy, maybe you could talk about the BBC.
I wouldn't want the job because I'm not bonkers, but I completely agree that the forces of darkness have undermined the independence of the BBC. So the first thing I'd do is shut the window and pull the curtains to protect this wonderful organisation, and it needs a proper system of governance. It clearly doesn't have that. Samir Shah is a good bloke, the chair, but the actual system of governance is very poor. And they also need very clear editorial structures. A big problem they have is too many bosses. I know you used to be a news boss, but they have too many news bosses and current affairs bosses overseeing individual programmes, and that is why they made those mistakes.
That whole structure came after I left, to be clear. That came after I left. But I think, Trevor, it's really important. You wouldn't wear what's been going on at the BBC, having the editorial interference that's come from the board. You just wouldn't wear it.
You're probably right, but, you know, I'm happy where I am. Lau, just let's go back to the big story of the day. I think we'll be able to show you the scene in Geneva in a minute, but Donald Tusk, the leader of Poland, has issued a statement saying, together with the leaders of Europe, Canada and Japan, we've declared our readiness to work on the 28-point plan despite some reservations. However, before we start our work, it would be good to know for sure who is the author of the plan and where it was created. What do you think he might mean by that?
I think it's a really canny statement, because there's already doubt in Washington about whether or not this was cooked up by Steve Witkoff, Trump's advisor on this, and in Miami with, I think his name is Kirill Dmitriev, who's got a very close tie to Putin, went to Alaska with Putin when Witkoff arranged that summit. So I think that what Tusk's doing there is quite clever, just sowing the doubt that exists already in DC that this is essentially Putin's plan.
Was this written in Russian?
Well, I don't have any doubt about it. And if I look at Witkoff and I look at Putin, I know who's the cleverest person there, and they should not be manipulated by Putin.
There's an amazing fact, actually, about Witkoff. He's been 6 times to Moscow, never to Kyiv.
Well, tells you everything.
Really? Well, OK. Last word on this, Paul. Can it work, do you think? What's your feeling?
Well, clearly the plan as it stands isn't going to work, but let's hope that this is the beginning of something a bit more sensible and constructive. But it really obviously puts the Ukrainians in an unbelievably difficult position.
OK, well, this has been a fascinating morning. We will all see if our predictions are right later on today or possibly during the week. There's going to be a lot on those talks in Geneva from 10 o'clock. That is it for us for today. We'll be back next week at 08:30 on Sunday. You can watch Politics Hub every night, 7 p.m. But remember, big thing, the budget, Wednesday.